All right, I'm talking today to you about my experience in the U.S. Army in Vietnam. And based on my memoir, Barbed Wire Brothels and Bombs in the Night, I'll have a few facts for you more toward the end. I share most of this from readings from my book. It's faster for me. I won't fumble with words, and I'll remember it if I read it. And maybe a Q&A at the end, hopefully. Why did I write the book? As far as I'm concerned, it's another step in the healing of trauma. First step is own it to yourself. Second step, tell somebody else. Maybe the next step would be share it with your higher power, if you have one. And then another step, or maybe the last step, is put it in writing. Writing helps crystallize your thoughts and your feelings. You can always change that, but it's there for other people to look at and read later. You don't have to be present. So hopefully it lives on as a legacy. And I did it also for other people for that reason, hope and healing their trauma. Not just the trauma of Vietnam, not just the trauma of casualties, but the psychological, emotional for the soldiers, the civilians, and the family members of. Okay, the American War. Oddly enough, in Vietnam, that's what they call it. We had advisors there starting as early as 1950 through 65, and I think about 25,000 in 1965, and then we sent troops. We started escalating when we sent Marines into Da Nang in July of 1965. Our troop strength peaked at almost 500,000 plus 50,000. And we withdrew. We were completely withdrawn March 29, 1973. And some of you may remember, if you were alive then, the exodus from the rooftop of the embassy. And the helicopters were leaving, and people were clamoring to get on the helicopters. April 30th, 1975. Okay, how did I get there? I dropped out of engineering school early '68. I'll come back to that a little later. I got my draft notice in late '69 and was inducted July 29, 1969. Now I gotta find my note here. Where'd it go? Okay. Lost my little sticker. Let me find it, please. July 29, 1969, the day I dreaded since dropping out of engineering school. On that cold, overcast morning, Dad parked our Chevy station wagon at the curb in front of the local draft board building in Louisville. Mom, Dad, and I waited in silence for my scheduled rendezvous with transportation and whatever would follow. We'd avoided mention of Vietnam to that point, or at least I did, as if some veil had descended. But I couldn't escape his constant reminders. Verlin, my younger brother by 4.5 years, had stayed home to ready himself for school, and we'd exchanged our goodbyes there. Worrywart Mom crushed the wadded tissue she used to wipe away her stream of tears. Dad remained still, facing straight ahead, reminded of his Navy experiences in World War II, I guessed. Mom had told me he'd suffered nightmares after that war. I unfolded and reread my draft board papers for the umpteenth time. No mistake. Report for induction into the U.S. Army. The slow asphalt roller of the draft process had caught up to me and made it clear that Uncle Sam wanted me. Reluctant to serve, I'd fantasized I'd be overlooked at the draft office, hoping some unseen power would wag a finger and push my records off a desk into a trash can, or a derelict alcoholic would drop a lit match and burn down the draft board building. I wanted to avoid a mom meltdown, wanted to stay strong and say to her, "I'll be okay." Wanted to tell her not to worry, but I couldn't. Doubt swirled about the decisions that had led me to my current circumstance, and dread mixed with sadness over departing from the two people always nearby. I was about to go into the future, where new possibilities would lead me into manhood or a body bag. Within about 3 days, I'd enlisted to become an intelligence analyst. I didn't want to go to Vietnam as an infantryman. Completed my advanced individual training late April '69, got 1 month off for leave, and reported to go to Vietnam, South Vietnam, Republic of, as we'd say in the Army, in June 1969. And that's a photo of me early days. Headquarters right outside, right off the beach. We're coming in, we're beginning our descent into Tan Son Nhut, the pilot announced. That's the Air Force Air Base, airport in, now it used to be Saigon, now it's Ho Chi Minh City. Whoosh. A rush of warm, humid air circulated through the cabin, carrying the smell of corrupted vegetation, a jungle of living and dying, thick, heavy, and hidden in darkness. I felt a sense of suffocation. Constrained by my circumstances and forced to remain buckled to my seat while being propelled into my unknown future, my lungs threatened to seize. My throat threatened to slam shut. Every cell in my body wanted to deny reality. Before the plane rolled to a stop, a sergeant started. If we encounter incoming rounds, keep moving until you're off the plane and get to a bunker or hit the deck. His instructions, straightforward, amounted to a no bones about it slap in the face. And as if those words weren't enough, he delivered another swift kick in the ass. The plane's engines will continue running. Once we're off and an outgoing group boards, this plane will leave. That comment extinguished the last possibility of my escaping Nam. Reality had come home to roost. You ain't in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. However unrealistic my hopes had been, there was no way around the fact that I'd arrived in Nam and wasn't leaving anytime soon. And it wasn't like I thought I'd hide in the plane's laboratory or a cargo hold. Pronto, I was off the plane, onto a bus, gone from the airfield, and delivered to the Long Binh In Processing Center. The bus driver brought us to a stop. Grab your duffels and dismount. Enjoy your stay. No time for jokes. I could be dead in a minute. A wet dog smell, along with a cloud of dust carried by a gust of wind, greeted me when I stepped off the bus. Will I melt in the heat and humidity? A sergeant standing nearby pointed an index finger toward a building. You're assigned to that barrack. Go in, plant your ass on an empty bunk. Yeah. Another no-frills Army accommodation greeted me, the same forest green linoleum flooring, wood beam support columns, bunk beds in rows, spaced 6 feet apart, the same as basic and individual training. What was new was the odor of Nam rot, and where am I, and how did I get here? Questions that clogged my head. When would a half-crazed sergeant burst in, screaming orders and berating me? Okay. As an intelligence analyst, I was assigned to 2 Corps headquarters as part of the 55th Military Intelligence Detachment. First part of my year there, I was billeted in the same compound as the headquarters building. So I had like a 5-minute walk, a commute across a gravel parking lot to get to work. 6 months after that, I'll start from here before I get there. So in country, 3 weeks. Long enough to submerge into the daily routine, I missed Rudy's camaraderie. He was the guy I was replacing. Before he shipped home, I spent most every minute of office time with him, and his absence left me a little lonelier, but I stood a little closer to the end of my 365 too. When I'd catch my own freedom bird back to the world, if I didn't get zipped into a body bag. Click. Static, chopped music and voices made it obvious John was searching through the frequencies of our office radio. He was our sergeant in charge in our office. We briefly listened in on Armed Forces radio now and then. Most of our news from the world arrived in our mail and in Newsweek and Time, both magazines easy to get. As our access to television in English was extremely limited, we passed along tidbits of news like Squirrel Girl gossip. Raines, our lieutenant in charge of the office, didn't want the radio on most of the time. Brass had band music in the workplace, and with a gaggle of officers right outside our door, one could walk in unannounced if they wanted. "You're listening to Armed Forces Radio," the announcer's voice said. "Here's the latest news. The United States has landed men on the moon." Everyone in the office got quiet for the replay of Armstrong's words when he stepped off the lander. One small step. A few minutes later, John switched off the radio. "That's enough," he said. "Neil Armstrong went to the moon, and I went to Nam." And the reason I put that in there, when I went to engineering school, I was planning and hoping to become an astronaut. And I'd studied Russian in high school and even joined Air Force ROTC at U of L. But that came apart for a number of reasons, including the fact that my eyes went bad and I knew I couldn't become a pilot, much less an astronaut. About 6 months in my tour, our detachment was consolidated in a place called the Pie Slice, which was an area shaped like a pie slice out by the perimeter, kind of between the perimeter and part of the airfield air base. That's a picture of me about 2 months before I left at my barrack there in the Pie Slice.
Was that because it looked like a pie slice?
Basically,
Okay.
kind of an odd looking shape. I never walked the boundary, but that's my understanding of it. Thump. Roused from sleep, I thought, what was that? Thump. A collective GI consciousness stirred to attention. Another moment passed before urgent cries of incoming echoed from scattered locations by guys yanked from dreamlands of heated fornication with eager young females or the bliss of nothingness. Thump. "Mortars," Ray yelled from the adjacent barrack. "Should I move?" Thump. "Are those a safe distance away? Should I stay on my bunk?" Thump. "Greetings from Charlie," Kevin yelled from across our barrack. "We never dealt with mortar rounds at the hotel," I said. Thump. "No, the compound is 5-star, Kevin replied. "Move?" No creaking bunk frames. No footsteps across the concrete floor. With the yin-yang of indecision, I held my breath. My heart pounded. "Head for the bunker," I called out. Thump. "You might not get there," Paul replied. "Roll out and crawl under your bunk if they get close." Thump. Another round had crashed into something solid. Still a safe distance away? A shift in the mortar's aim could put one anywhere, even right on top of me. Thump. "Time to move?" "Which way are they going?" I called out. Thump. "They're not walking this way," Ray yelled back. "Stay." Thump. "Let's keep it that way," I yelled, and appreciated Ray's ability to determine the direction of rounds, that the rounds walked. That means they're moving in a line of some sort as the mortar fires. I couldn't distinguish the line, but knew Charlie lobbed his shells, trying to hit a valuable target. Random for Charlie, personal for me. Usual tour there was 1 year. We called it 365, and usually also minus a drop, which could be maybe 7 days down to a couple of days when your replacement arrived. I turned out getting a 2-day drop, which ended up being a 1-day drop by the time it was all over with. Let me go back. Just in comparison. Before my 365, or at the beginning of it,
You grew up.
nearly after.
And that's 2 years?
Hard way. No, 1 year.
That was just 1 year?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I returned stateside July of 1970. Get to my page here. Relieved to be away from Nam, my brain told me I didn't have to expect a rocket or mortar attack. I didn't have to expect to hear someone screaming the word incoming. I saw clues all around me, from the clothes people wore to the absence of trash littering the floor. Everything appeared newer and brighter in color. I detected no heavy smells of mold or rot filling warm, humid air. Everyone spoke words I understood. My bones told me otherwise, however. Nothing quite right. Everything felt familiar, though different. Rather, everything reminded me of Vietnam, a queer reversal of the previous 12 months when I hadn't been able to avoid thoughts of home everywhere I looked. Not from the presence of familiar things, but their absence. As I had enlisted, I was supposed to serve, if it was a full length, 3 years instead of the 2 years that you would serve when you were drafted. You could shorten it a little bit here and there. I was lucky enough to get it shortened a little bit because of a seasonal employment discharge. So I served my remainder of enlistment in Fort Bragg and was discharged October 71. 2 years, 8 days, 8 months, 8 days. Almost every serviceman can tell you to the day how long they served. And I found out that day, which was quite a slap in the face, that I was subject to reactivation by the president's call. I didn't know that. And I had nightmares about that for about 7 years. Now some statistics, some more sad, upsetting statistics. And depends on how you slice them and what period of time you're looking at. They'll vary a little bit. I think in total we lost just over 58,800 men or women. According to these stats I'm looking at, about 41,000 died in action, just on the battlefield, or as they were getting transported to first aid or whatever. Just over 1,000 went missing in action and they've been declared dead. Here's the one that really gets me. 575 were killed in action and there wasn't enough to send home. Tragic. Over 47,000 hostile deaths at that time, and then another stark figure, 382 suicides, self-inflicted. I'll go ahead with the next one and then come back. 8 died of our service women, mostly nurses, of about 10,000 serving there, 8 died. So it was not just men. Okay. I'd gotten a letter from a friend or a colleague, buddy that I had met in AIT, and I'm reading it. Hey Connor, remember me, Alex from AIT? Of course. I hadn't bothered to keep track of anyone from basic or AIT. Hadn't bothered to keep track of high school or college mates either. Dad had moved us around enough times as I grew up that I'd learned to float along on the current of life's river and considered most relationships scenery along the bank. I decided to look you up, so I ran down your assignment records. Maybe my records at Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, and Saigon. I'll get to the point. I thought you'd wanted to hear about Jelly Bean. You remember Jelly Bean? Soft-spoken, red-haired, light-complexioned Jelly Bean? How could I forget? He died last week from a gunshot wound to the head. Wait, what? I reread that sentence. He died. Gunshot wound to the head. No. Mild, meek Jelly Bean? Dead? Jelly Bean at Holabird AIT? Shit silly after a few slugs of slow gin? Another casualty of Nam? Returned to the States in a body bag? Part of an anonymous newscast statistic? Not anonymous to me. Shot. Who shot him? I continued reading. Shot himself while cleaning his weapon. They reported it as an accident from a gunshot wound sustained while cleaning his weapon. Well, that's BS. Everybody was taught in basic, you never point a weapon at yourself unless you intend to use it. Okay. A little bit more statistics. I don't need to go through all this, but they're just talking about statistics from a different pie or different slices of a pie. It turns out, summarizing this, we've lost over, at the time this statistic was calculated, almost 95,000 Vietnam era veterans committed suicide. This is about a 45 year period. And that the rate of suicides amongst Vietnam veterans wasn't any greater. It was about the same as of the general population. And I'm not sure what that says either about the suicide rate of veterans or the suicide rate of the general population. It is sad regardless. Okay. Okay. Post-discharge from the Army. I'd worked hard to keep everything together since day one in the Army, to appear adequate, to avoid a loss of control, and not get busted for fighting, although I'd come close many times, more times than I cared to remember. Now, however, no longer wearing dog tags and puke green fatigues, I resembled my crumpled heap of Roadrunner scrap metal, both inside and out. That was an Econo car they were having in Plymouth. I bought one with money I'd saved up in Nam, and I wrecked it in an angry fit drinking. Totaled it. And I'd never admitted to anyone, not a single soul, that my shit wasn't together until there at the Med Center. I'm at Western Kentucky University and gone to the Med Center with a complaint. The doc's voice remained steady and confident. I know a good counselor and I think she can help you. He picked up the phone receiver nearby and dialed the University Counseling Center. I want to schedule an appointment. He told someone on the other end of the line. He looked at me. Next Tuesday morning, okay? Long way off. I hoped I could make it. I nodded and accepted the appointment card the way a drowning man grabs a lifeline. Thank you. Tears wet my face. I wanted to hide from the horrified look on the young female receptionist's face, whom I saw out of the corner of my eye as I hurried to the Med Center exit. I figured a doc had spilled the beans and she could see my darkest secrets. Okay, so I had a little bit of information about suicide. 988 is the national one. And there may be others locally dotted around. I know a lot of counties may have mental health services that are available and some nonprofit agencies also. But that's a good one to remember. If you or anyone that you know of is having suicidal ideation, try that number. And then there's the Wounded Warriors. Okay, so I think I'm at the end of what I had prepared, and I want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions. My Vietnam book is the second memoir. My first is about growing up with my dad, who drank. He had his own PTSD from World War II. So it gets passed on from generation to generation, unfortunately. And you can contact me at those places, and I also have some books here if you're interested in reading more about those. And a quarterly newsletter I write about my writing journey. Did you have a question or comment? Okay.
Was the standard deployment 365 days?
Standard, yeah. Now, if you were drafted, you spend your 365, you could extend, and I think the extension was about 6 months, and if you extended 6 months, you discharge, go directly home from Vietnam. So you ended up serving a year and a half. If you were enlisted, you'd have to, I think it was, you'd have to extend another year. So I could have, but I didn't want to be there in the first place, and like, get me out of here as quick as I can. Okay, next. I think I saw Max's hand.
Talk a little bit about your writing process. Like, did you keep a journal while you were there? Did you have notes? Or, how did you, after many years, go back and reconstruct? How did you do it?
No, I didn't journal while I was there. I didn't start writing. I was writing about peak climbing in about 1985-ish, 1986. So I didn't even start writing anything about this until, and this was my third manuscript I started working on, which coincidentally got published first. So I was like, I'm always reverse engineering. I started writing this one sometime around, about 2000, 2005. But I've been going to classes, like continuing education classes or city college classes, adult learning, and started going to conferences and whatnot and learning how to write or learning how to write better. I mean, it's always an improvement. Most everything that I've written came to me as I sat down and focused on what I could recall. And one thing that helped me was to listen to contemporary or period music as I wrote it, as I kind of put my body back in that situation. So I think most of it is just from memory and reconstructing memory. Now there's a few things I did deliberately change, a few names are changed. I may have made a mistake on taking a trip down the southern part, one of the headquarters at one point, somebody pointed that out. But for the most part, and when you're writing a memoir, two things about writing a memoir. One, people can't remember exactly what was said, so in conversations, but also when you're writing, you don't write a conversation. Conversations are boring to read. So it has to be a little bit jazzed or changed somehow. So the dialogue is a little different. But for the most part, I think most of it's pretty accurate. And sometimes the timing on what happened first, the sequence gets changed around. But otherwise, it's as accurate as I can make it. And of course, I'm the only one that can tell you what my experience was.
How did you feel that society treated you in general when you came back?
I think I was already prepped on how I was going to be treated, seeing what was being done in the protests and and what was being reported about how others were treated after they'd come back. Because when I went in '69, we'd already been fighting, and there'd been statistics on the news every week about KIA and how many we'd lost and all this for years. And so I expected I wasn't going to be treated very well. I kept my head down. And when I was on leave, after I got back from Vietnam, before I reported to Fort Bragg, and even after that, when I'd leave the base on the weekends to go back home or whatever, I wouldn't wear military clothes. And the only thing that would betray me was my hair. I had a mustache that was legal in the military, but otherwise, but I was somewhat awkward at the time. I wasn't dating. I didn't know how to talk to women and feel comfortable about it. And it kind of fit the picture. But I avoided telling people I'd been in Nam and protests, and we didn't have a whole lot in Louisville anyway. That was kind of a backwater. Yes, sir.
I'm a little confused about something. In the excerpts that you read to us, and that you stated you didn't want to be in Nam, right? And there was a lot of fear in the excerpts. You enlisted as compared to drafting, and as I understand it, enlisted means you stay longer. So I'm confused, like, why did you choose that, or what's the difference, or maybe there is no difference?
Well, there is a difference. That's a good question. I was drafted initially, and then when I went to the processing center in the Army, we would spend maybe a week or so while we're waiting, the individuals are waiting to be assigned to a basic training unit. And so during that time, you get your vaccinations, your haircut, your uniform, you're taught how to do your bunk, you're taught how to salute, blah, blah. So during that period, within the first 3 days. I think it was the third day. They marched us over. We were going to give blood. I didn't want to give blood. They didn't ask me for my permission, but so they gave us a pep talk, and they said, if you want to enlist, if you want to get different jobs other than being in the infantry or whatever the Army decides you're going to do, then you take this aptitude test, and it will determine the kinds of jobs that you're qualified to do, and if you enlist, we will guarantee whatever that is for you.
Okay.
And then the zinger was, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like this: I guarantee if you don't do that, you're going to go to Vietnam in the infantry. I was not going to go to Vietnam in the infantry if I could avoid it, so I enlisted. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I had some older relatives that were in the military and served during that time. The way I remember them telling me was when they got their draft, their draft cards, their numbers were really low, so they knew they were going to get drafted. So they both enlisted, and my recollection is that if you enlist, your commitment is longer, but you pick where you go. So they enlisted because they didn't want to go to Vietnam, and they both ended up in Germany, but they were there for longer than they would have been if they were drafted. Is that your recollection of how it was back then?
I'm not aware of it operating or working that way. There were deferments for being drafted at the time that I was drafted. One if you were married, one if you were in college, and the other one was a physical deferment if you had a medical problem.
They knew they were going to get drafted, and they wanted to beat it before they got drafted.
Right, and so a number of people could enlist before that, but I think it was still the same thing. If the draft was 2 years, enlistment was 3 years, but I wasn't aware that you could choose where you got to go. I never was in that situation to find out, so I'm whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Why did you leave engineering school? Knowing you
Well, my grades weren't bad. I didn't have to study much in high school. And I'd kind of discovered alcohol and had one close friend. So I was partying Friday, Saturday nights, wasn't studying. I didn't have the wherewithal to get a tutor to help me. So I wasn't studying that much. My grades started to suffer. I wasn't failing, but I was on the dean's list, the warning list, and after about the third quarter, we were in quarter system, not semester, I decided I don't want to flunk out. And then my eyes went bad, couldn't become an astronaut. I laugh or joke about failing the psych test for the Air Force ROTC. I didn't complete the test, so they said it was incomplete. It wasn't a valid result. So they said, well, you're welcome to stay another year and take the test next year. But then again, this was the primary reason. Yes, sir.
Did you join or identify with any veterans organizations after you got out?
No. Well, I take that back. There was an organization on campus at Western Kentucky University. It was called VOC, Veterans on Campus, and that's the only one I've actually joined. And that was like a sorority, but we didn't do the foo-foo pledging junk. I mean, it's like, we're more mature than that. That was our thinking anyway. But that was the only one I've been involved with.